Now, we have pivotal elections coming up this weekend in both France and in Colombia, as well as unrest rocking Ecuador. We're going to talk about all of that in a second. We're joined by a Paris-based independent journalist, my former colleague, Cole Stangler. Welcome, Cole.
Thanks for having me, Ryan.
And also journalist and international editor at El Ciudadano. Is that how do I say that, Dennis?
El Ciudadano.
El Ciudadano. Dennis Rogatyuk joins us now to discuss. Welcome, Dennis.
Thank you very much, Ryan.
And so Cole, let's start with the French election. So the world breathed its sigh of relief when Emmanuel Macron, fended off the right-wing candidate Marine Le Pen recently, and the world kind of moved on from there. In France, though, something, as you've written recently in the New York Times, something rather extraordinary happened. The entire left has gotten together in a coalition, and what's going on? Like, why are we caring about France again? I thought we were done.
Yeah. So, for the last few election cycles, the legislative elections have been something of an afterthought. You have the presidential election, and then a few weeks later, you have the legislative elections. So the president, in order to approve his agenda, needs to have, or it's better for him to have an absolute majority in parliament. So this is the election that we're talking about right now, these legislative elections to determine control of the National Assembly, control of that critical house, that chamber of parliament in France. And so after this defeat, pretty significant defeat for the left in the presidential election, parties essentially got together, coalescing around one political force in particular, which is La France Insoumise, led by Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who almost qualified himself for the second round of that presidential election. The forces have coalesced around Mélenchon and La France Insoumise, and they were able to put together a united slate of candidates for the first time since 1997 in France. So the communists, La France Insoumise, the socialists, and the Greens all running in this united coalition. And what we saw in the first round of this two-round legislative vote was the left had a pretty strong score, running essentially neck and neck with Macron's party. And now as we're heading into the second round on Sunday, there is an outside chance that they could actually have a majority. It's unlikely, but an outside chance at winning a majority of their own on the left, which would mean you'd have a left-wing prime minister. In this case, Jean-Luc Mélenchon says he wants to serve as prime minister. Even if they don't get that majority of their own on the left, the sort of second prize would be depriving Macron of an absolute majority. So in English, what we call a hung parliament, a situation in which Macron is governing essentially by a relative majority, as they say in France, so cobbling together support from other parties to govern. And if the left does that, that's still a pretty significant accomplishment given where things were, just a few weeks ago even.
And the benefit of having both of you two on to talk about this at the same time is that there's a sort of transformational, or there's a chance for a transformational change to happen in Colombia. So, Dennis, I want to read you, this is how the Washington Post is framing it in an article. They say, Colombia will hold the presidential election on Sunday unlike any other in its history. Voters in Latin America's third largest country have demanded change, rejecting a political establishment that has held power here for generations. Regardless of who wins, the new president will herald the start of a potentially transformative era. But will the historically conservative country select its first leftist president, or will it take a gamble on a political outsider? Two-part question. One, do you think that description is apt? Is it accurately capturing the dynamics here? And then two, what do you expect to play out in the next few days?
Well, Emily, I believe that it is an error to consider the right-wing candidate Rodolfo Hernandez to be some kind of an anti-establishment figure, as many media sources, both in Colombia and outside of Colombia, have basically called him the Donald Trump of the country, as he is a multi-millionaire who's made his fortune in construction and in real estate. He ran on a pro-business platform, and in the last several weeks in preparation for the second round, he's basically been courting the votes of the traditional right-wing basis, and very much rejecting all the program and the program and the main proposals made by Gustavo Petro. and the entirety of the country's traditional right-wing forces, what you call the electoral base of ex-president Alvaro Uribe, has basically joined ranks with him, both the political leaders and also voters. So he effectively, Rodolfo Hernandez, although he is sort of running on a platform against corruption, or according to what he said, against corruption, he is in fact basically represents the same kind of political mentality as the country's economic elite. So really, this is still a battle between a genuine kind of left-wing anti-establishment figure like Gustavo Petro and the continuation of the old order, with Rodolfo Hernandez as its new face. Now, to answer your second question, I believe. This will be an extremely tight race, as the latest polls have basically showed the two candidates to be neck and neck. But if Gustavo Petro does win, he would face an even more difficult battle of trying to govern the country, lacking a majority in both chambers of the Colombian legislature. But more importantly, he would be forced to confront the Colombian state, or say the state which has been molded in the image and in the political policies of Alvaro Uribe.
Yeah,
this will be an extremely difficult time for Gustavo Petro.
And the anti-establishment phenomenon that we cover kind of so much on this program is really playing out in Colombia in such a pure and distillized form. Here's the recent TikTok from Rodolfo Hernandez. I want to play here. It shows that this is the way that he's been running his campaign. Let's see if we can put that up.
1, 2, 3, go! Little mama, show me how you moving. Go ahead, put your back into it. Do your thing like it ain't nothing to it. Shake that girl.
And that's not an anomaly. Like, that's how Hernandez is running his entire campaign. Like, that's who he is. He's skewing a lot of broadcast advertising. He's called the TikTok king. He's just running stuff like that through TikTok, and it's got him from obscurity to on the brink of winning presidency. There's something about the way that parties are falling apart here and institutions are falling apart that enables this to happen. And Cole, and Dennis, I'm curious for your take on this too. But Cole, how is this playing out in France? Like, there does seem to be this connection that people across the world want to feel directly, with politicians outside of institutions. And what is it about that phenomenon that played into the kind of left's ability here and the left's decision here to kind of come together? Is it Mélenchon that they have this connection with? A lot of people seem to also have a huge kind of distaste for him as well. But how are you seeing this phenomenon play out in these elections? And
who has the best TikTok?
How's TikTok playing out in France?
Yeah, I think Mélenchon has certainly been very present on social media, and I think they run a very effective sort of digital campaign aimed at mobilizing young people and getting support among young people. And if you look at the polls in the presidential election, Mélenchon won a very good score among the youngest age bracket, 18 to 24, and you see that also in the legislative elections. For those who vote, they vote in a pretty clear majority, or just over 50%, I think, in the polls that we've been seeing, voted for the coalition of the left. The problem is that young people vote far less in France than older people. It's really striking if you look at the age breakdown, in the election. Just if you look at the polls, so you have 18 to 24 age group breaking heavily for Mélenchon. The problem is that so few of them vote. If you look at the top age bracket, 70 plus, huge majority for Macron and for his party. You have this huge, really political difference around age, which is pretty striking in France. And I think maybe to quickly address that first question you had, Ryan. I think Macron's personality is also really, really playing into this election here as well. You have a sort of kind of sentiment of frustration around Macron, towards Macron and his policies. a sense that, a reluctance to want to give him this majority in parliament, which it should be said as well, since France moved the legislative elections to occur right after the presidential elections in 2001. Since then, there hasn't been a single time in which the president hasn't gone on to win a majority in the National Assembly. The fact that this is even up for grabs right now shows you just sort of how uncertain and different the era we're living in today is. But I think a lot of anti-Macron sentiment that we're seeing reflected in this election as well.
And Dennis, just as we sort of bring this full circle, what is on the line in this election in Colombia? Basically, maybe another way to phrase that is, how could Colombia change pending the outcome of the election this weekend?
Well, I believe that Colombia effectively has a choice as to whether continue with the current political and economic model based on neoliberalism, based on extractivism, based on this extremely close cooperation with the United States, based on the really on the policies which shaped the last 20 years, and particularly the state violence, state repression against social movements, against protests, all in the name of security and stability. So that is, the model of Uribismo, on one hand side, and on the other hand side, choose instead a new path which Gustavo Petro represents, and that is the path of implementing the peace accords of 2016 with the country's major guerrilla forces. It means dismantling the state's this massive state security apparatus and its oversized military. It means putting an end to any sort of cooperation between the Colombian state and the country's death squads and paramilitary squads, and of course the different narco cartels, which have been proven to have ties to various parts of the Colombian state. It means embracing Latin American integration rather than just simply focusing on an alliance with the United States and NATO, and of course promoting and embracing new social rights for the country's indigenous minority, for the Afro-Colombian minority, for the LGBTI community. So the contrast between the two paths couldn't be starker. And I believe that in the case of victory, for Gustavo Petro, I believe that what we're going to see is that we're going to see this new so-called pink tide of progressive governments across Latin America being solidified. We're going to see the community of Latin American and Caribbean states at CELAC being strengthened, and this will certainly give a major boost to the campaign of Lula da Silva in Brazil to also win the presidential election at the end of the year. If all this comes to pass, Latin America will have the largest number of left-wing, progressive, or center-left governments that it has ever had in its history.
And so, Dennis, on that pink tide, real quickly, can you give us some insight into what's going on in Ecuador? Just recently, the indigenous leader of major protests there was arrested by the government. Doesn't seem to have done much about the protests. We don't have a whole lot of time, but what should people know about what's going on there?
Well, Ecuador is currently living what I believe is a beginning of a new popular uprising and mobilization against the right-wing government of Guillermo Lasso. At the moment, the main organization leading the protests is the Confederation of the Indigenous Peoples and Nations, or CONAI, which is headed by Leonidas Issa. The indigenous movement is effectively protesting against the increasing prices of fuel, increasing food prices, increasing say financial and financial insecurity, against the privatization of sort of the key parts of the state, such as the banking and oil sector, against job insecurity, against a whole sort of list of factors. Now, Leonidas Issa was briefly arrested by the by the Ecuadorian government, but was then released after a massive response by the CONAI, by the indigenous organizations. The protests are still very much ongoing and don't seem to show any signs of subsiding. But this is a first major challenge for Guillermo Lasso's right-wing government that at the moment finds itself in the minority in the national assembly. So if it resorts to more repression, to more state violence, then we could potentially see a repeat of the events of 2003, when President Lucio Gutierrez was forced out of power by the CONAI, by this same organization.
Well, we are living through awfully interesting times, and we appreciate both of you, Dennis and Cole, helping us walk through some of it.
Thank you very much, Ryan.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll have more Rising right after this. Stick around.